biotopes, and looking at the biotopes of the Midwest, which I think is absolutely perfect and fits and some of the other speakers that we've had coming in talking about native fish. Also, not giving everything away, but working on getting back here in the spring to do a biotope, native biotope demo. Currently, Jonathan is the Midwest Territory Coordinator for WASA. He very generously donated a really nice high-end filter here for the auction, for the support of the club, as well as a bag of some high-end steamer soil substrate from WASA, which is fantastic. I've got that in my half tank I use for the horticulture program. Anyway, please give Jonathan a big welcome. I got a double mic too. You can speak.
And we'll be good to roll. Okay, there we go. Yeah, hey, how's it going, everyone? Feeling okay after work, you know? Anyone have an extra drink in the parking lot before you came in? Anything, just to, you know, ease the tension, things like that? All right, well, never mind about that. But yeah, so thank you for the kind introduction. I'm just going to give you a brief little starting point of where I started in life. I think similar to a lot of us here. Just so you guys know, this is going to be very laid back. It's been a long day. It kind of was driving all around Missouri from Kansas City over here today. So energy level is not quite where it normally is, but we're still going to have some fun with it. So I just want to give you, not that we need any more introduction, but just to give you guys some fun photos of my hobbies and some of the things that I've done over the years. So I went to school in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, which for those of you who don't know where that is, yeah. It's in the middle of Wisconsin, really kind of in a spot of the state where there's not much else going on, but it's a beautiful area. Had a lot of fun. Yeah, it's good stuff. I did a lot with the aquaculture facility there. So this is one of our studies on whether or not monochromatic light has an effect on the growth rates of yellow perch. In a nutshell, no, it does not. So that was pretty typical of most undergrad research, is at least you know what doesn't work, right? So we also did a lot of like hydroponics, things like that as well too. A lot of fun stuff. Got to keep some cool fish there. That's going to be relating to what we're talking tonight as well too. These are Iowa darters. They're pretty much endangered through Wisconsin and Illinois, but being as we were part of the university, we got to work with some cool fish with proper permits and stuff like that. So this is a fully colored up male. I'm going to try not to block the screen as well too. We do a lot of surveys, a lot of dip netting, a lot of just, checking out what's in all the glacial lakes and things of that nature. During college, I did a lot of aquarium maintenance. So the aquarium industry kind of had a hold on me, much like it has a hold on all of us and our wallets in here and our spending habits and things of that nature. So I did a lot of aquarium maintenance, installing tanks in downtown Chicago, in the central Wisconsin area, as well as, outside of Chicagoland area too. So big tanks, fun stuff. Working with a lot of crazy equipment, wiring electrical through ceilings, hopefully not starting any fires or flooding multi-million-dollar owners' homes, which did happen. So, it happens. We got to work with a lot of cool animals, a lot of cool fish, things of that nature. So did a lot with reef systems, a lot of filtration work, just grew a lot of fun corals. Nothing rare here, just some really cool Monty caps and things of that nature. Got to set up some fun tanks for, customers. Keep in mind when you're doing aquarium maintenance and stuff, this is not the typical tank. And while I like to go a little crazier with my planted tanks at home, this is pretty straightforward and basic, but this is not typical of what you see in maintenance accounts. Typically, 99% of maintenance accounts are going to be, any guesses? Reefs, but on the freshwater side, there's one specific fish I'm looking for.
Discus.
No. Blood parrots, our favorite fish in the world, right? I joke. I'm a big fan of a wild type boy, so wild type live bears, things like that are, kind of goes hand in hand with native fish in that sense, but a lot of fun stuff. Been to some fun places too. I'll be back to do my #1 talk, the trip to the Amazon, Just joking. That's nothing wrong with those talks. It's just everyone goes to the Amazon at some point in time. But had a lot of fun there. Being able to see neon tetras in the wild and actually collect where they are really puts it into perspective just how similar but also different some of the ecosystems from North and South America are. Go to South America, 99% of the Blackwater creeks is 3 inches of water and then about 4 feet of leaf litter, where all your corridors for Baudi are sitting 3 feet down in the litter. And you got to scoop through all that and decipher what's a leaf and what's a cory cat, because they look identical when you're in the wild picking them out and such. But really neat to be able to do that. I think it's kind of an itch that we all share and such. And I'm also a big plant guy, so me and my friend David were really enthusiastic about any of the orchids that would fall from the upper canopy onto the ground, which were pretty much doomed. So, plaster them back onto trees, et cetera, and take good photos of them. So at home, I primarily like to grow things. There's just something about a nice lush tank, right? Not even the super manicured style of aquascaping, things of that nature, but just growing plants is always a fun thing to do. So I did a lot with just what a lot of us are doing here already, things like that. So had a lot of fun with that stuff, just played around with different plants, things like that. What's a macroalgae aquarium, or what's a good alternative to doing a saltwater reef tank if you're trying to get into saltwater for the first time? Macroalgae, pretty much a planted saltwater tank. So really easy to get into and a great alternative to your coral reef tank if you guys are trying to try saltwater or you like the look of saltwater fish and invertebrates, but don't like to get into the nitty gritty of dosing a whole bunch of crazy stuff and things of that nature. So nowadays, I just kind of collect stainless steel for if there's ever any need to scrap metal and make money from it. So I have a bad habit of, now that I'm approaching 30 years old, instead of getting interested in the History Channel, I'm getting interested in the history of aquariums. So that's bad news for the empty basement that I have that's now filled with a bunch of metal frame tanks and the storage unit my girlfriend doesn't know about. So we're going to try to keep it that way. Speaking of which, this is the one that allows me to do things. So big shout out to her. This is Laura making a Wabi-Kusa ball at the Chicago Aquatic Plant Society Wabi-Kusa event. So just so you guys know, now we're a little bit more acquainted, and now we can talk about some biotopes of the Midwest and their ecosystems and such. So like I just pointed out, I do work for OWASA. I am the Midwest Territory Account Coordinator. It's a fancy name for sales rep. So I'm going around to all the stores in the area and talking with them, trying to get them hooked up with some cool products and supporting them on our end as far as if they have issues, things like that, or they have an event or anything like that, or whatever they need, we're there for them. Most stores don't open up until 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, right? So that leaves a perfect window for 6 a.m. to around 9 p.m. to be able to get out in the local area. Because how many of you travel for a living? Anyone here? Or semi-travel or have a travel portion? When you go to a new city or something like that, you're just seeing the hotels and the airports, right? So sometimes it's nice to get out of that routine and actually get out in nature and expand kind of what you know of the Midwest, because it's a beautiful area that we all live in here. And are you all from the Midwest originally, or no? Oh, Melanie, I know you're not. Come on. But nonetheless, there's a lot nature-wise that it has to offer here, especially if you're willing to take a little closer look at some of the bland brown fish that you have in the streams and things like that, especially if you look at them during March, April, and May. That's when the things get a little more exciting and whatnot. So we're going to jump right in. Let's take a look at this. So imagine you're driving down the road and you see this on the side of the road. How many of you are apt to be doing this while driving past? Just kind of gazing out the window, longing for something that you can't really reach at that point in time. How many of you have passed by a culvert like this and, you look in the mirror and you're just longingly looking out the window, waiting to see what may or may not reside in that creek? How many of you grew up going fishing or catching, crawfish or anything, whatever colloquial term you want to call it? Just raise your hands. All right, so there we go. About 80% of us have a shared common trait in our history of being alive, of longing to be out in the creek and figure out what is underneath this root system, right? Oftentimes, that's what I look like when I'm passing by something like that. Or you see something beautiful like this, and you weren't able to get out in the creek, so in my hotel after I was too busy talking with stores during the day and stuff to get out into nature, this is usually what I look like in my hotel room. So That's on special days when it's been unusually rough, and it's usually some more tears coming down too. I joke, but there's a lot of ecosystems within the Midwest, and the unique geology and history of the Midwest, whether it's the glaciation events that have happened in the past and creating these glacial lakes and movement of sediment and gravel and all these cool forces of nature that have shaped the land over the years, has really created some interesting environments that even your most basic lake or your most downtown St. Louis creek that runs through the heart, that's all channelized by concrete slabs and things like that, still boasts some amount of nature. I think there's something about that we can all kind of take away, or when we're in those spaces, you can admire that. More importantly, with all of us in this room, there's something about that is, at least to me, very alluring about capturing and creating in our captive environments in our home aquariums here, or rather at your homes, whether it's in the basement or the family room, etc. There's just this kind of mysterious kind of, when you see this overturned log, or you see that riparian vegetation growing on the downturned log, poking out of the water, etc. There's something kind of universal about that as well too. Like I was talking about with the Amazon, is you saw a lot of similar things. It was just mainly different species occupying and that have evolved for that niche in that exact environment. But similar concepts and similar niches overall that are just different because it's a different area of the world, right? You see a lot of different vegetation. You can do and replicate a lot of these environments in different ways, or ways that are becoming more popular in the aquarium trade these days. How many of you have set up a riparium or a paludarium before? Okay, so a couple of you. For those of you that know, a riparium is more of a full aquarium that has emergent growth of plants, and then a paludarium is more of a half land, half water, or some sort of combination of those two, where you have a section of water, but you also have emergent growth as well too. But what a perfect example right here, where you have a creekside bed and some vegetation overhanging, and this is a typical scene that you'll see when you're going along these vegetated creeks, especially this time of year. Yeah.
Is that Mysotis? Where was that picture?
This was Northern Illinois, and this is in a public park close to the mouth of the Fox River, or one of the tributaries running into the Fox River. As far as what species, I'm not sure, but the instant I noticed that there were flowers on here, I'm probably going to go back there next week and see if it's still there and what's there. Because as you can see, it was quite abundant. I mean, it was lining the whole creek bed. It's a very disturbed area, though, in terms of human interaction. I mean, I'm pretty sure I saw an Evergreen truck, which is our local fertilizing company and stuff, going by, which is usually not good news for those that aren't aware. A lot of our fertilizers for commercial farming, things like that, run into these rivers or get washed out from the soil and contribute nutrients to the local streams that contribute to algae issues like cyanobacteria and stuff. So that's a topic for another time. So we're going to look at a couple, some of the ones that I've been to recently. So Ransom Lake in Michigan, this is up right underneath, like around Interlaken, up by Traverse City, Michigan. How many of you go up to the UP for, whichever side, or, I know Wisconsin is the UP, but in my books it's Michigan altogether, that little piece of land that they sectioned off, but it's another topic for another time. Ransom Lake, though, is a glacial lake. There's a really cool, elaborate system of lakes up there, some connected, some not. But when you get up in that area, you've got the Platte River, which is an amazing river system. If you ever get the chance to snorkel or tube down it, amazing aquatic vegetation, all sorts of some Eliocaris species, things like that, in addition to a plethora of really cool native fish species as well too. But Ransom Lake is a great example of a good glaciated lake with really good vegetation, as well as some really cool aquatic life. When you're kayaking over it, you're going to see some really cool lilies. I wasn't able to identify these. I'm just getting into kind of more of the native plants here as well too, so this is going to be a learning curve for all of us here. So, but beautiful lilies, bright red. I mean, absolutely gorgeous, and covered probably about half the lake in the shallow areas. Very malmish, like malmy water, substrate, things of that nature. Some more aquatic vegetation, and then also a species that I'm quite familiar with, or at least a genus, is Potamogeton, is a very common species that you guys will see all over. Primarily, I'm not sure about down here, but up north, it's mostly Potamogeton crispus, which is a very invasive plant. So when we start talking about plants, we'll talk a little bit about legality and such, but I'm primarily coming from a standpoint of what is happening in Illinois. I'm sure some of you folks here, or there may be some folks here that are a little bit more acquainted with Missouri laws and such, so we'll get into that a little bit later. But really cool to be able to go around and find Laguidia on the shore banks and such, and also partially submerged in the first like 3 feet of water within the shoreline. So I'm pretty sure this is Laguidia palustris, common species that we've had in the aquarium trade as well too. So growing in the wild in the Midwest, kind of cool. Kind of cool to see a lot of these like species. It's also really neat, and it's going to be eye-opening to see just how many plants that are available at your local fish store actually originate from the southeastern coast of the U.S. as well too. I saw some Juncus repens over here. There's a bunch of Eleocharis species here. So you know, over here you have your auction table where there's some beautiful plants that coordinate with tonight's talk that you can take home yourself and create your very own Midwestern biotope or representative inspired biotope. So. Here's a little bit more of the Laguidia and some other species mixed in as well too. As far as fish go, I primarily started as a fish guy, so I'm a big fan of native fish species. There wasn't much diversity in this lake, but there was a stream connecting it to another lake, so that does open the opportunity for various species. The water was very low, so my guess is that because of the water level this year, there wasn't much that was coming in or coming out. But you know, your typical shiners and things of you know, bluegill, your game fish, things of that nature are usually what you find in glaciated lakes. You can also take inspiration from other things too, even walking around, you know, old down logs, tree stumps, things like that. How many of you consider yourselves like aquascapers or try to actively create a tank and an aquascape that is appealing, not just for the fish and keeping them and raising them and breeding them or plants, but just for something to look at, something in the family room or anything like that? Good. Okay, that's awesome. That's more than a lot of clubs. That's good. That's good. That's awesome because there's so many benefits to being able to have a tank that's not only physically appealing to the fish that you're keeping, but also appealing to you as well too. So cool to take inspiration from other things around and just take inspiration from nature as well too. This was underneath the actual surface of the lake, so you can see some down woody structure, habitat. On this lake specifically, there really was no shoreline. What the shoreline consisted of was down trees as this lake expanded, or erosion on the shoreline swallowed up trees and plummeted them down into the water, creating woody habitats along the shoreline for fish and more debris to decay. So if you were to step on the side of this lake, your foot would sink down about 4 or 5 feet into just basically malm and built up detritus and decaying organic matter and such. So, but pretty neat to be able to see different species of, pretty sure there were some different species of Eleocharis, hydrilla, some other species, and a bunch of other native plant species as well. A little bit more, you know, some blending of different plants. Cool to be able to get some different perspectives as well too. Even with the log right here, it's forcing your perspective back, making the scene look deeper, things like that, right? And another plant medley. So moving on, a little bit more of a spring-fed creek, so something that's less aquatic vegetation and more marginal growth. How many of you can spot the other animal that's in the screen here on the far left? Anyone see that? Yeah, northern water snake. Really cool how easily camouflaged they are. I actually took the photo and then later realized it, so this is a cropped-in version of it. And I was with my girlfriend at the time. She's not a fan of snakes. I love snakes. I think they're cool. I like amphibians and stuff too. Big dart frog guy. Whoop, whoop. So it's pretty cool to see that stuff as well too. The only thing that we found in this, aside from Gammarus, which is basically like scuds, which is our type of freshwater copepod and amphipods here, detritivores, things that are going to be breaking down into smaller pieces, all your organic and decaying material, was these guys. Anyone know what this is? You can shout it out. Don't be shy. Anyone? What does it look like to you all? Kind of, yeah, kind of like a snakehead. Think of a snakehead if it was not wildly illegal to keep in the United States, and then on top of that wasn't extremely invasive, and then on top of that stayed about 5-6 inches max. So think of a smaller wolffish that's native to the US, and you have yourself the central mud minnow. This is a really cool species, extremely hardy. not the prettiest thing to look at, but who here loves wild-type bettas, right? No, I'm just joking. I love wild-type bettas. Who likes rivulus killifish from South America? Nah, I'm just joking. I love rivulus as well, too. There's some pretty ones, but really interesting fish, really good behavior, very bold as well, too. So if you guys are looking for a fish that has that predator attitude, but can take frozen foods or isn't strictly a live food-eating fish, this is a great option for you. Moving on, anyone recognize who this may be right here?
Ty.
Yeah. So yeah, Steve, you're cheating right there.
He also spends that much time with his snorkeling, just trying to fix himself in one place so he can take.
Yeah, to me it's the shorts. You know what I mean? That's what says it all. But yeah, this is the Kishwaukee River. This is a very, I guess, more sentimental river to me. I live in Woodstock currently. Well, maybe I can scratch that out on YouTube, but it's fine. Which is the headwaters of the Kishwaukee River. We're up in northern Illinois and whatnot, and it's a really interesting ecosystem out there. It's kind of neat because you have Chicagoland on the right? And I'm geographically illiterate. So you have Chicagoland area, and then you get further out, and we're over here, et cetera. It's an interesting river system because it doesn't start or come off the Fox River, which is notoriously kind of, there's a lot of paper mills on the Fox River in between Milwaukee and Chicago. So it's not the most clean river. But the Kishwaukee, the headwaters is in Woodstock. So it's, aside from being surrounded by farmland further out, where it eventually joins in with some of the other river systems and such, it's pretty diverse as far as northern Illinois goes. Just so you guys know, the further southeast you go in the U.S., the more biologically diverse you get. So Tennessee, Alabama, all those southern states, et cetera, are going to be extremely biologically diverse. You guys here even have a lot of diversity, and even more as you go south even further. So a lot of the species that I'm covering here, again, are coming from northern Illinois and the northern areas, which have a lot to boast, but not nearly as much as what you guys have here. So just keep that in mind, because some of the stuff here is going to look pretty plain Jane. But here's Ty again, holding up the target species that we had here. Anyone want to take a guess what that tiny little fish is right there? Can anyone? It's like kind of orange. I don't know. Oh, that's a southern red-bellied dace, and I'm going to show some photos of that guy later. But the cool thing is you look at this river right here, and it's not just a flat creek that runs for 100 feet in a straight line. When you're looking at these river systems and you go to your local creek, you're going to notice all these tiny microhabitats within even a 50-foot stretch, even a 20-foot stretch, or even a 10-foot stretch of river. And each portion of those habitats is going to have a completely different type of fish, feeding behavior, breeding behavior, everything. I mean, it's really interesting to see what fish are adapted for different portions of creek. From that, you can literally make maybe 7, 8 different biotopes just from within this photo right here. And we're going to get into what a biotope is to begin with, because I try not to be too stingy when it comes to biotopes or anything like that. I think it's a pretty open subject to this. You're trying to replicate nature in a nutshell, right? Within the Kishwaukee, you also have other beautiful shiners, just like this one. This is spotfin shiner. I believe you guys have these here. This is our only Cyprinella species up north. I think technically we have steel colors somewhere in the state, but it's extremely restricted, and you shouldn't really mess around with them if they still exist here. But these guys are absolutely beautiful. They have this beautiful blue sheen on the side, characteristic black spots on the dorsal, and just typical white tips on the males, and just this kind of nice blue silvery sheen. And they're found throughout different biomes of that Kishwaukee River, whether it's from the straight runs of high current flow that's just bombarding them 24/7 and they're just playing around in the stream, or it's in these pooled up areas where the water is a little bit more stagnant, but the males can really show off to the females and display to them and such. In fact, when Ty was up here, we actually watched a male and a female breeding essentially and doing the little shimmy and the dance and everything, which was really unique. And there were some choice words said when the camera toppled over, and it scared the fish away. But we'll keep that out of the public eye for right now, or the ear. Again, woody structures. How many of you have taken pieces of driftwood or anything like that for your home aquarium, right? Okay. Well, I didn't even ask you guys to raise your hand. You guys are, we're getting classically trained here. What should I do? Should I do a little? No, okay, I'll move on. But you can see different areas, and just walking around a creek can really give you some cool inspiration if you just take the time to sit there, observe, and just be in nature. It's also a great stress reducer too. So what is a biotope? Is it species specific? Is it specific to geographical barriers? Is it a specific 4-foot stretch of creek, and so you have to have a 4-foot tank to replicate exactly that? It's got to be picture perfect. You have to have that exact gravel from that exact spot, that exact wood, the exact plants, and the exact fish. Nah, it doesn't have to be. You can do whatever you want, really. In my mind, biotope is you're mimicking a specific spot, as specific as you can. I think there needs to be some lenience there because most times, often than not, you may be able to get the fish from that area, but you may not be able to get some of the majority of the other fish species that are occurring in that same body of water or interact ecologically with that species and the relationship that they have there. Great example would be, like South America is a good example, or hey, even somewhere in the Midwest where, there may be a species that's illegal to keep simply because its range is so restricted or it's been, just pushed away from invasives, things of that nature, right? Yeah, biotopes. When you go and do competitions and things like that, it's each one has their own set of rules. Different biotope competitions are more or less specific with what they want to do or what they want from it. In a nutshell, though, in my opinion, an aquarium should be what's appeasing and appealing to you. It should be satisfying to you when you set it up. It should be something that you enjoy at home and isn't something that you stress about not having that exact species of plant that comes from that exact creek and that exact morph of that exact plant in your tank. Because a lot of times it's not always realistic to be able to get those exact species. So when I'm talking about biotopes in this presentation, I'm going to be talking more broad. And when we get into the plant section specifically, from my understanding, Missouri does not allow any native plant collecting without proper permits, which are apparently pretty difficult to get. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. Yeah. And same thing goes for a lot of states. So a state-by-state basis is sometimes people can't even do biotopes of their own place or their own state legally, so to speak. Wisconsin is a great example. Wisconsin, they protect their lakes very heavily, and so to put it simply or in very layman's terms, they kind of just say no to everything, so that way there's no chance of reintroduction. And there are serious concerns on both ends, right? As aquarists, I understand we all want to keep the fish that we want to keep, but from an ecological perspective, let's admit it, sometimes we've all made pretty impulsive decisions on what to bring home and put in our tanks from a fish store. Imagine that, but from a creek, especially when something's bright and beautifully colored, right? Sometimes it's hard to say no. So there are laws in place that do prevent some states from collecting at all, whether that's plants, fish, animals, reptiles, anything like that. So first and foremost, when you're doing any biotope, is to always check your local and state guidelines as far as what's allowed, what's not allowed. So just always good to go over that multiple times, and that's not the only time you're going to hear me say that. So this is a beautiful tank done by Nick Kinzer. He's a really great aquascaper. He's competed in the AGA, Aquatic Gardeners Association, numerous different times for numerous different categories. This is a really beautiful tank. I just think it's the way that he uses light is very interesting as well too, and I think that's something that's highly underrated within aquariums to begin with. Typically we just throw a light over the top, get yourself a Phoenix or a Twin Star or something like that, slap it over the top. You have consistent, even lighting all the way around. How many of us play around with light or actually have maybe like an incandescent bulb on one side so that way, the water movement is making a ripple effect of some sort to mimic what you would see in, say, like a creek in the morning when the light isn't fully penetrating through the trees or from right above during noon and such. Anyone mess around with that?
That's how I do it.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll have maybe like 5 people next time. It's cool. It adds a different dynamic. It adds a different perspective. It can make your tank feel more natural, more like you're looking into a slice of nature, not like you're looking into a glass box per se. So I think that was greatly executed in his scape. Jen Williams, if any of you are familiar, she's another amazing aquascaper as well too, also an OWASA ambassador. So, you may see her at a local fish store doing a demo in the near future at some point in time. So some cool things to watch out for. But nonetheless, she did a great job with the rock work in this tank. And she did do native fish, not native to our area, but native to Virginia. I actually had the privilege of going out and speaking to them on a similar topic and actually going collecting in the creek that she was imitating. And I tell you what, this is pretty accurate in some of the spots that we were seeing as far as that goes, both species and some of the rock work. She has a very more stylized look to it as well too. So what I'm getting across is there's not just aquascaped biotopes, but you can even create a biotope that's more simplistic as well too. And I'm gonna kind of show you one that I set up for a customer up in Northern Illinois, actually a friend really. He asked me to come and aquascape this 200-gallon tank that he wanted to do as an Illinois native biotope. Now the wood is from Texas, and, well, not from Texas, it's not from anywhere, I didn't say that. But it basically is a piece of wood that he had that he wanted to use. So the idea was that we're gonna use this overarching piece of wood to kind of create some shelter as if the trunk of a tree had eroded away from the riverbank and fallen in partially and created habitat for fish to catch a break from current too. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then filled up, we just did common species. So this I would conceptualize as more of like a biotope-inspired tank. It's not 100% accurate to a specific region, but it's very characteristic of some of the streams that you would see in northern Wisconsin, et cetera, where you have these huge beds of Vallisneria just streaming in the current, et cetera, and a lot of the similar species that we kept in this tank, but still allowing for, you know, some fun and visual interest. And I played a lot more so with shadow in this tank to create some areas that were, you know, in focus, out of focus, things of that nature. They also don't have to necessarily be biotope at all. I'm not saying that when you keep native fish that you have to have them in a biotope tank. You can also just keep them in planted tanks. Native fish in general are just absolutely great. How many of you kept rainbow shiners or seen rainbow shiners at your local fish store before? Okay, cool. Great native fish. I mean, kind of crazy that they're bred outside of the US and then imported back in, but you know, it is what it is. It allows it to be accessible and such. That is a species that is commonly available for the most part as far as native fish go. How many of you kept Florida flagfish? Okay, bluefin killies? Pygmy sunfish? Okay, my man. So it's good. How many of you kept black-banded sunfish? Okay, all right. How many of you kept native fish at all, period? All right, just throw out some names. What have you guys kept?
Orange-throated darters.
Oh, very good. I got some juicy pictures of those coming up, so a lot of fun. Anyone back there? Nice. Love all those different species from the Panhandle. That's pretty cool. Did you get them to breed?
They spawn, but I can't spawn.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome, though. Beautiful fish, too. Probably the most like emperor tetra-looking native fish that we have here. It's kind of weird how similar they are in some ways in color and such, but that's neat. Anyone else? Oh, very cool. Did you catch anything else while you were in the Ozarks? Did you catch anything else while you were in the Ozarks?
Well, I've got a lot of things in the Ozarks.
Cool.
A lot of like top meadows, mud meadows, darters.
Nice. Exciting. That's fun. Oh. Well, we're going to move on. So when we're talking about like those different biotopes and those stream habitats and whatnot, stream morphology is key. So like we already kind of pointed out the different areas, or that you can take a lot of different biotopes from a single stretch of creek. This is going to kind of outline it. So you have your kind of your runs, which are going to be faster moving. You have your riffles that are going to be shallow. That's where a lot of your darters and your faster flowing species are going to be. Your pools are going to be where some of your larger species congregate or are there to take a break from swimming hard in the fast current, et cetera. All these areas can be replicated in an aquarium. You know, how many of you have a shallow pond style tank at home? Okay, awesome. Sweet, there may be some more because they're a pretty interesting tank to keep, and it allows you to do a lot of emergent growth as well too. Here's an example of like a pool. So you can see on the side here where you had your run or your faster current, and then it kind of pulls out, carves out some of these areas, and this is all typical of stream morphology where over time a stream will meander if it's not contained with concrete or human interaction, et cetera. But in this portion of this pool, we usually caught western black-nosed dace. We caught some different types of suckers, basically juveniles that were upland and then eventually would leave that area to go into larger waters, etc. You'd also still find orange throat darters in here as well too. It was kind of like a catch-all, and it is mostly that. Whereas when you move into more of the run in the center here, and you still have some of these sloping banks and gradual banks and things like that, like here, and especially when you got into this area, and especially in this area right here, where you can see it's very shallow, it's maybe like 4 or 5 inches of water, it's mostly gravel, substrate, some medium, larger sized rocks in there as well too. That's primarily where we're finding orange throat darters as well. So as far as like creating it in your home aquarium, you know, there's definitely kind of a look for the Midwest biotope, so to speak. And it depends upon which ecosystem. You know, are you looking at the lake that we looked at, or like Ransom Lake? Is it going to be heavily planted? Are you going to be relying a lot on plants to kind of replicate that dense foliage? Or are you going to be relying primarily on hardscape, on just your rock and toppled down trees to kind of recreate that eroded riverbank? It's up to you, and it depends upon which area you're trying to imitate. But in a nutshell, I've got some suggestions, and luckily a couple years ago, me and the resident Melanie Holmes here, the Blackwater Queen, rightfully dubbed, and user of twigs and surveyor of leaf litter. I'm trying to think of what other titles we can put on there. Gourami extraordinaire. Some more we could probably come up with. But we'll skip that. We went to one of the local areas or one of the local creeks, and we were spending some time looking at fish and also just looking at habitat. We found these really cool structures and these root structures that were exposed. So, you know, how can you create something like that in your home aquarium without taking something necessarily from nature? So one of the ways, or some of the suggestions that I have is, you know, primarily there's a lot of different types of aquascaping wood that you have in the hobby, right? So what I'm going to focus on is more how can you do it from your local fish store. If you have private property, and laws are always different, so I'm just speaking from Illinois standpoint, but if you have private property, that's kind of your property to do with it as you please. If you have some debris or driftwood on it, or if you're like up in Lake Superior or any of the Great Lakes, etc., I'm sure there's laws pertaining to taking things from public lands, but private lands, from my understanding, are pretty fair game as long as you have permission from the landowner or you are the landowner yourself. Again, that's specific to the areas that I am familiar with. I'm not sure about what's going on down here. For the most part, there is some risk when you're collecting wood from the wild. You want to make sure that you're not bringing any pathogens in, that you're not taking any, you know, aquatic invertebrates like dragonfly larvae or nymphs that can easily chop your guppies in half or your shiner in half if they so please. I'm not sure, how many of you have seen a juvenile dragonfly before? Pretty gnarly. I mean, straight out of Alien versus Predator, right? You know, the whole little, you know, mouth extruding thing as well too. But so you just want to be careful. If you do take something from the wild or find a nice piece of driftwood, etc., please, never put it back in the wild. Once it's yours, and that goes for anything that you take from the wild legally. Once you have it, you never, ever release anything, whether it's native or whether it's not native. That's how you end up with dojo loaches in the Des Plaines River of Illinois, and we don't like dojo loaches in the Des Plaines River of Illinois. We don't like anything that can really give a bad rap to the aquarium hobby because we've already have enough of that as is, right? That being said, when you're going and searching for hardscape materials, I think pieces of wood, if you've ever seen cypress wood, it's going to be very situational to your local fish store or your online supplier, but there is a type of wood called cypress wood that is very representative of like pine trees being fallen into the water. It's got very straight and narrow texture to it with sharp nodes on the side where old branches used to be. That's a great one for kind of replicating lakes because it really gives you that look of like a downturned tree, not just the stump, but the tree in there as well too. Spiderwood is pretty common. How many of you have used spiderwood here before? Okay, so pretty widespread in the area. And I understand it really depends upon the local stores and what they're keeping here and whatnot. From what I've seen though, you guys have some pretty great fish stores here that are very open to new materials and new hardscaping materials as well too. But spiderwood is a great one in the sense that there's a couple different types of it. There's regular spiderwood, and I've even seen a black spiderwood as well before too. I think is chemically treated, I think, to turn it black. Yeah. But if you're going for a certain look and aesthetic, there's a way. It may not be the most natural way, but it is a way to replicate kind of like a root structure and a darker root structure that may have been underwater and waterlogged and starting to deteriorate if you want to put a story behind it, right? Black forest wood is another one that kind of gives you that chunky look to it. You can also use Malaysian driftwood as well too. I personally feel like Malaysian driftwood really doesn't look too native to the US, but it also depends upon how you use it as well too. Sometimes you may just want to use a piece of wood to create structure within your tank, or a piece of wood to have partially exposed, but have that being built into the bank or your slope of your tank as well too, to create whatever kind of scene that you're trying to replicate. This specifically was at Ransom Lake. I didn't bring my chainsaw with me that day, but I'm thinking about going back. I don't know. We'll see. Then I need to rent a U-Haul as well too, because that log was about 50 feet long and about probably a couple tons. I don't know. We'll see, especially with it waterlogged and whatnot. But it's just great to be able to take pieces of nature. The coolest thing is with aquascaping becoming such a common, I guess, niche of the hobby, so to speak, a lot of the ways that you can actually manipulate wood, you can take common species of wood and manipulate them into looking like something that you would see out here. So for example, if you go and buy like 2 or 3 big bundles or bigger pieces of spider wood, take a sawzall or take a Dremel or like any sort of like, you know, your clippers for clipping your bushes and hedges outside during springtime and whatnot. And start peeling off piece by piece that whole, until you have a stump left. I want you to destroy that piece of spiderwood. I want to see nothing left except for these tiny little itty bitty twigs and these little individual branches. And then try piecing them together to look like what me and Melanie were looking at before. When you have enough of each size, or if you have, depending upon what you're trying to replicate, if you have enough of that smaller twig size, it's amazing what you can create just by latticing in and just haphazardly almost gluing in these pieces together. Speaking of gluing, cyanoacrylic glue that you can get at the dollar store, or you can buy in your commercial fish store, etc. They'll have that, and there's even activator sprays to help it cure much faster. It's a great way. It's inert once it's cured as well too, so it's not really dangerous per se. It's all a great way. So I generally use kind of like a 3 to 2 to 1 rule, where for every 1 big piece of wood, I'll have 2 medium sizes, and then 3, if not 3 times 3, so 9 more pieces of smaller roots or pieces that are much smaller and whatnot. The idea behind this is that odd numbers kind of help to create a more natural look when you're laying things out. It's not as numerical and even in terms of looks and such. It's not as curated as well too. But it's just a good rule of thumb that when you're picking out wood from your local fish store or wherever you get your driftwood from, etc., to keep in mind when you're creating something. It just, you know, even if you're just scattering the twigs along the bottom as if it was just pieces of the tree branch that had fallen in and started to decompose, it's all great options as far as that goes. So there's a lot of different species of driftwood out there, and you know, you do manzanita wood, that does come from the US, so like that's, I guess you could say, kind of more on par with it, and it does look pretty nice, and it comes with a lot of smaller pieces attached, so that would be easy to snip away and give you that kind of like severed trunk or severed log look in the water. Prime example of you know, kind of a root system eroded. How many of you think you could do that with spiderwood? Just show of hands. If you really put it to it, if you put aside the knitting for the night, or if you put aside, you know, whatever craft that you like getting into, and you're like, I'm going to craft with some driftwood and some glue tonight, you know, it's a good time. I recommend it. Grab a glass of wine too. Why not? You know, botanicals. Again, our lovely Melanie, rise and shine right here. You know. Botanicals can be used, common, you know, oak leaves. All of the typical trees that you see here are all shedding leaves during the fall season. And it's actually very important for when it comes to the ecology of these streams and the health of these streams. What breaks down and becomes food for all the small things? Leaf litter. What creates shelter for fish to hide from predators, things of that nature? Leaf litter. I feel like it kind of gets a bad rap in the hobby, right? It makes your tank look dirty. Well, if you saw where most of your fish came from, you wouldn't be able to see half of them where they come from if you were looking into the water 9 times out of 10, right? So I say yes, I do the leaf litter. Go, live oak is a great alternative that's on the market and readily available for dart frogs, etc. It's a much smaller leaf too. I think it comes from Texas or around there is where it's native to. So it's readily available. And it just takes a little bit of boiling water to really get that to sink and release the tannins and such. So rocks and substrates, this is going to be pretty straightforward. You're going to mimic whatever you're trying to imitate in the wild, right? What I do a lot of times is I'll just go to the local gravel yard. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be collecting from some quarry nearby or something like that. So you are getting something that's somewhat close or somewhat geologically accurate to what you're trying to represent in your aquarium. Even if it's not from that quarry or specific from that area, find something that looks alike. Big tip though, when you're going and looking for rock at a rock yard, try to bring a little thing of vinegar, or if you can, maybe don't carry muriatic acid around in your car or anything like that in a squirt bottle. Yeah, don't load it up in your ketchup bottle, that's for sure, right? But use an acid to try and see and put some on the rock and see if it's acidic. It will react and fizz if it is an alkaline base or a limestone base, etc. The only thing with limestone-based rocks is, how many of you keep African rift lake cichlids? Okay. Is your guys' water like really soft here or something like that? Okay, I figured it must be just the same slab of rock that we're on up north too. Yeah, pH is what, like 8.4 coming out of the tap? Or 7.5, 7.8? Yeah, gotta love it for when you want to do those softwater fishes, right? How many of you have an RODI system? Okay, yeah, painful water bills, right? Check for, make sure that your rocks are inert so you don't have to deal with high calcium or things of that nature. Luckily, most native fish and most native plants are not super picky. Now, if you're replicating a really soft water stream from there's a portion in southern Illinois that does have cypress swamps, you may not want to use anything that's alkaline in nature because it's not going to be indicative of that environment per se, or whoever it was that was wanting to do pygmy sunfish, right? They're pretty hardy, but they generally do better and breed better in softer water and things of that nature, right? So just choose your materials wisely is basically what it comes down to. Just another photo of Jen's scape with the rocks. Something very important, how many of you come from a saltwater side or have done saltwater? Okay. How many of you used to put something on the bottom of the tank so if the rock structure actually caved over, or those of you that have any sort of geophagus or anything that likes to dig in the sand? Anyone? Okay, so good handful. In a nutshell, for those of you who don't know, there are some species of fish, not necessarily native fish, but just fish in general, like geophagus, and in saltwater you have pistol shrimp, goby pears, things like that like to burrow and such. Good rule of thumb still for native fish tanks, put a thing of egg crate down where you're going to have heavy rocks. What it's going to do is going to disperse the weight of that rock and that mass of wood or whatever you're putting in there across a broader surface area, so you don't have a pinpoint of one pressure point that could possibly crack a tank if it's not 100% level, et cetera, like that. One little bit of egg crate and they make it in the thin layer too will help disperse all that and you're good to go. Now you can deal with your big boulders and things of that nature. So Jen did a good job of showing kind of piecing things together, gluing things together, and then how that translates into the tank before it's all, polished up and all that. I just wanted to show that I tried to use varied gravel size and such and different rock shapes and sizes and kind of piece them together as if they would fall naturally within a creek, but also not too curated to the point where it didn't look natural in that sense, Here's another one of Nick Kinzer's scapes. He actually used, I believe, spiderwood in this scape for or something similar to it, I believe. But beautiful use of wood. Created some depth by creating almost a little path as if it was like a carved out portion of the stream. And he had some rainbow darters in here as well too. So let's talk about equipment very quickly. Nothing too crazy. When you're talking about tanks though specifically, tank does matter. A lot of the fish that are native fish are your shiners, your fundulus, your native killifish, things of that nature are going to be jumpers. So How many of you have found a crispy little treat on the ground the day after? Or rather, how many of you have had your cat not eat their full breakfast because they were too busy snacking on your, your hatchet fish that jumped out of the tank? Yeah, I'm right there with you. I just lost one of my coral red pencilfish because it jumped and had half a coral red pencilfish on the ground. Why my cat wouldn't eat the whole thing, I don't know. Beats me. But nonetheless, kind of aesthetics can come at a charge here. So I like rimless tanks a lot. I'm biased. I work for a company that makes them. So I really enjoy them though. We have the lovely Scaper line, 90 centimeter on the side here. I'm actually planning on using this tank on the top right for a native biotope tank, probably of Ransom Lake because it's more vegetated, things of that nature. And the species that we found in there were not as bad of jumpers as some of the darters and things of that can be. There are alternatives to that. You can use a rim tank. Primarily, most of us probably have plastic rim tanks at home, right? Or you could be a little crazy like me and hoard too many metal frame tanks that still had a hood on them and lid on them, right? I may or may not have one of those in the back of my car right now. Laura, if you're listening, I don't have anything in the back of the car. But in a nutshell, you can add a lid to a rimless tank. In my mind, it kind of takes away from the aesthetic and the purpose of having a rimless tank to begin with. But if you're just enjoying the tank and you want to take it, I think I'm getting too close. I'm crossing the streams. You can, yeah. Sorry, I'm teetering off for the night. You can basically have the aesthetic, but also have the practicality too. If you're willing to compromise with a lid, or those little clips, and then you put a glass lid on, or even like a polycarbonate lid or something like that you can cut, or get some greenhouse material from Home Depot, et cetera, and cut a lid that way too. Rim tanks offer the benefit of that they're rimmed, so you already have an ability to put a lid on there and such. They're a little bit more common and a little bit more cost-effective as far as that goes, and they come in some they used to come in some pretty ideal size. How many of you have like 33 longs or 40 longs still? Nice sized tank, 125, 6-footer, the classic style shape is a great shape. Typically, when you're talking about native fish and such, they're not so concerned with height, as most of our fish aren't concerned with height, except for like angelfish or discus that are vertically inclined. But most natives are going to want a longer space, and especially your higher energy fishes, like most of your shiners and things like that, will appreciate length to swim because they are extremely active. When it comes to paludariums and such, this is what I was talking about when I was talking about shallow tanks, so something that's short and shallow. They do have ones with, you can buy like, I think ZoomEd makes the 50-gallon low boy, right? And that does have a rim on it, so you can do that. The cool thing about these tanks is that if you choose your species of fish correctly, it's really neat to be able to imitate that marginal space and that marginal habitat on the side of a creek with all that emergent growth coming out. Again, you guys have some really awesome plants available that occupy that same region right there, and I know there's a handful of you that grow those year-round, so you guys have some really cool resources for those that are looking to do something like this. Flow, two basic types. You got laminar flow and turbulent flow. So laminar flow is going to be what's consistently going over those riffle pools and those runs, right? It's going to be there all the time, 24/7, even more powerful when there's a rain event like we just had a little while ago, and still powerful when the water level is low and such. And then you have turbulent flow, which is a little bit more chaotic. It's typically in a single direction, but it's all mixed and random to some extent as well too. A lot of ways you can achieve this: upsizing your filter, trying different filter types, Stream Max pumps or any of your circulation pumps will do well. Again, I'm biased, but here we are. Filtration-wise, most of your native fish are going to be a little bit heavier on the feeders. Also, if you're keeping them in a high flow situation, they may not get to all the food that you're putting in the tank. So choosing the right food that they will eat, let alone is nutritious, let alone they will grab. So not just doing sinking pellets if you're doing topwater fish or midwater swimmers like your shiners and things like that, will prevent a lot of that excess waste from accumulating. That's generally associated with like native fish when it comes to them being dirtier. Sometimes you can, when you're talking like sunfish and Lepoma species, you can kind of think of them as if they were like the African cichlids of North America in terms of temperament and feeding habits and such. But when you start getting into shiners, that's where they kind of become more similar to like tetras, but just of North America and things like that. Or I think a better example would be like danios or things of that nature, you know, more riverine fishes. Yeah, exactly. A lot of different options. You can use internals, you can use sumps, you can use really anything. You just want accurate biological and ample biological filtration for these fishes. They do move a lot, and especially if you're keeping more of the stream species, they're going to be very active, which also means a very active metabolism, which means you need to be feeding them daily or every other day, or just enough to be able to keep the weight on and keep them happy and such. So let's talk about the fun stuff now, okay? We'll stop droning off a little bit. We'll get into some of the plants. Again, we're going to briefly go over or show some species of plants that I have found throughout the Midwest. We're going to talk stuff that's commercially available, that is lookalikes, that isn't necessarily exactly what you're going to find around the area. But if you guys want to find stuff that's around the area, talk to your local members here and your fellow you know, Maasai people here that are doing those kinds of plants, because they're going to know better. It's like we just talked about a little while ago. Missouri is a little bit strict when it comes to, you know, and rightfully so, on native plants and such. Oh, you have different species of Alodia, you have different species of Myriophyllum. I believe this is going to be Myriophyllum aquaticum, which is also invasive too, so that's pretty typical of what you'll see on, you know, shallow riverbanks and things of that nature. Again, going to Laguidia, and also you do have quite a few different types of mosses. Something to point out is that one of the native species of mosses that is commonly available is, how many of you have messed with Physidens, frontanis, or any of the other Physidens species, or some of the Physidens species? It's a cool, low light moss. It's pretty low energy. It's pretty easy going and such. It has a beautiful structure to it as well too. We'll show you some photos of that in a minute. Here's some more Laguidias, various different types. A lot of different Potamogeton species. Potamogeton is a big genus. There's Potamogeton species from Africa. There's Potamogeton species from South America. Potamogeton, I think Gayi is one of the species that's commonly available in the hobby, or is available in the hobby. You can use those as stand-ins, right? No one's standing over your shoulder or breathing down your neck that if you don't use that exact Potamogeton species that could be invasive, that you can't have something that looks like it, or something that replicates the same movement that the Potamogeton does in aquariums, right? So a couple different species, things of that there. I think there's some watercress in here, or some in the photo on the far right, but it's a great example of some of the diversity that you can see as far as aquatic plants and vegetation in the Midwest. One other plant that's kind of I've seen burst out in the hobby recently is Samolus, and there's even another species that comes, I believe, from the southeastern part of the U.S. that's bright red underneath the proper conditions as well too. But this is a neat little rosette plant. I mean, you can almost think of it as if it's a sword plant to some extent, and it will grow immersed if it's in a high enough humidity situation and whatnot. It puts out these little kind of like buried flowers kind of deal. It's a cool plant. Then you have typical jungle valve scenario, right? How many of you kept jungle valve before? How many of you have a 55 gallon that you put the jungle valve in and you had gravel in there? Or something like that, right? So you're halfway there to a native fish tank. All you're missing is some shiners, right? So you're there, you know? Look at that. It's that easy, you know? So it's a lot of fun. Jungle valve is a pretty common one that you see. A lot of valve scenario species. A lot of Sagittarius species here in the Midwest as well too. Even a Sagittarius species over here in the auction as well too. Something that's pretty common that I actually see quite a bit of that's considered an aquatic plant but is also a marginal plant is Lobelia cardinalis, and that does occur in our range here in the Midwest. This was up at Ransom Lake, the same lake that we took a look at earlier, and this was just growing streamside from that creek that was emptying into the lake. So again, if you're doing a shallow tank and you want something that's going to grow emergent and create some pretty flowers, or how many of you do pond tubs? Okay, so a good fair amount of you. Again, another great plant for that as well too. It's just more ideas. Here's Physidens. So don't know exactly which species this is. There's a lot of different species in this genus, but these are just some of the ones that I've found in various different parts of the Midwest. Again, going back to Potamogeton, this is Crispus. This is something that you guys will likely see if you go out to your local creek. Do not take it, do not move it, do not pick it, do not take it home in your aquarium. It has been sold in the past. There is currently a site online that does sell this as an aquarium plant. It's out of stock, thank goodness. But this is extremely invasive, noxious Potamogeton species, and there are a lot more just like this. So please be careful about what species that you are keeping in aquariums. Unfortunately, not all shops, not all distributors are conscientious of where they're selling these plants to. So when you're going in and if you see something like this, just gently remind the owner, hey, this is something that maybe shouldn't be here or something of that nature. And that's all it takes, you know. Be nice about it though, you know. So we're going to talk about some non-native stand-ins that will give you a similar effect and are easy to keep and look kind of like some of the natives that we may have just gone over, et cetera. So Sagittarius subulata, easy plant, really great carpeting plant too. This would be great that if you're trying to recreate like a stream bed, usually you don't find huge mats of, unless if you're talking Potamogeton, but for carpeting plants, you can find them interdispersed. So even if you planted little sections of this, it'd be a really cool effect to keep them trimmed and keep them prompt and displayed separately from one another, kind of create a natural look in that sense. Eleucharis, hairgrass, there's a bunch of different species. A lot of us are probably pretty common with this. Great, and Montevendensis is not native to the Midwest, but it's, you know, southeastern coast of the US, pretty common. It's a great emergent plant too, once it grows above the surface as well too, just like a lot of the Eleucharises are.
It's different than those other ones.
Yes, that's a great example. But that's a great way also that if you were wanting to use one of the other species, you wanted to create that kind of nestled over grassy riverbank that creates structure and shade for plants along that creek side, is to use one of the floppier species. So you use different species to manipulate and get that look and that effect that you're looking for. Hemianthus cranthemoides. I'm not sure, I've been reading that this species is no longer seen in its native range. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I've not seen it collected.
It was, I mean, it is native to the northeastern US, but it's apparently is no longer there from either habitat degradation or just over.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if the Botanic Garden has it listed as extirpated, but it's
Yeah.
definitely not available. And when it's found, it's put on the list of, you know, here's a notable rare
Yeah.
species.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But common aquarium plant.
Oh, yeah.
One that we've all probably kept at some point or tried to keep, you know. Gradiola, I can't pronounce the last name of this one, but this is a really cool plant. This is beautiful, and there's a couple different species, some that are in Florida and South Florida and such. Really cool when you grow it emergent as well, too. Really interesting look to it. This, and then also there's, I can't remember the name of it, but I may have it on a slide. Liquidia repens. I don't think repens is native. It's palustris that's here in the Midwest, but repens is probably down south again as well too. So again, you could use this as a stand-in species, but palustris is also available, so you could just use that as well too. Bacopa carolina, I think we've all kept this plant. It's a great one. Flowers really well above the water as well too. Kind of gives you that bushier, more compact look to it. So if you're trying to do like a lake biotope, right, you can pick different species of non-native, but you know, give you that same effect or that same leaf shape, the same leaf type, you know, where the leaves are dispersed upon the nodes, or how are they, you know, alternating leaf nodes, are they not, and just kind of match stuff that looks similar but is more accessible, right? Juncus repens is a great one that kind of gives you that grassy look, kind of a little bit more wild, untamed look, and that's a great one to have for substituting other plants as well too. So now let's get into the fish portion, right? And then we'll call it a day. But nuances of fish keeping. Some of the pros of keeping native fish is temperature is not really a big concern. You know, how many of what's your typical room temp? What do you all have the thermostat set to, and you'll murder someone before they change it? 69 degrees, 70 degrees? You just yell it out. 70? Is anyone insane and likes living in 78-degree weather, or you're just like a Floridian that's taking refuge in Missouri right now? I know you guys have pretty humid summers, and I drove through here and I was not a fan, but no hot air lovers, I guess.
68 on my fish room floor.
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah. Well, regardless, as long as you don't get over like 75 to 78 degrees, you're good for native fish. Most of them appreciate colder water to begin with. These are fish that are overwintering here in the Midwest, so they can tolerate it, providing that they have a deep enough strata for thermocline. So it's similar to those that have kept the pond. You know, you have koi fish. They stay at the bottom of the pool. As long as you have 3+ feet of water, generally that ice layer, that freezing thermocline will not reach far enough down, or they can survive in that deeper water. So similar concept as some fish will move to deeper parts of the river or deeper parts of a river system during the wintertime to escape freezing water or to find warmer water as well too. Some of the downsides of keeping native fish is availability. You know, you guys have a lot of beautiful natives, and I would encourage anyone that's interested in keeping native fish, you can more than welcome to come up after I'm done rambling in a minute here and take a look at some of the books. Came across this one. You guys have some half-price bookstores here. Great find. Pretty excited about this one. I believe I'm not sure if he's here tonight, but there are some folks that are actually working on the new Fishes of Missouri book that are part of your club. So you guys are very fortunate to have those people in the club.
Was a recent speaker, and his
There you go.
book, I think, is in press finally.
Nice.
It's going to be awesome. I've seen the excerpts.
We'll be ready to pre-order that bad boy. So, but you know, pick up a book and take a look at what's on there. Also, Missouri State Fisheries, your guys' Natural Resource Department should have a list of approved and non-approved species or threatened and imperiled species. Always make sure what you're looking to go out and find, and always make sure that you have the proper permitting or fishing license to go out and do it, and making sure that you're doing the proper net techniques or proper net sizes as well too. But in a nutshell, if you can't get it locally, I always encourage people, just like the plants, to buy it and replicate the environment based upon what you're doing. So there are some other good sources for native fish. We'll go over those down the line. Price-wise, sometimes they can tend to be a little bit pricey. When you're talking aquarium fish, you know, it's not going to be your $3 tetra. How many of you keep rainbow fish? So some of you are used to paying like $10 to $15 per fish, right? Yeah, I know, it brings a tear to my eye too, but they're beautiful fish, and so are native fish, so it's well worth the price, right? So it's a labor of love, and it's the price that we pay to have them available as well too. But you can go and purchase rainbow darters and other fish species that may not be directly from your guys' area, but may be in a creek or river system. So Steve, I know you're talking about your orange throat darters, right? Those can be available for purchase on some of the online vendors that sell them and collect them legally and then prepare them for sale, as long as your state allows that to occur, basically. But as long as you purchase the fish and you have a receipt, that's generally a pretty safe way of keeping native fish, as long as your state does not just outlaw it completely, right? So, nice thing is you can cover all strata of your tank. How many of you used to have a tank that was like hatchet fish, tetras, and like a pistos or cory cats at the bottom or something like that, right? That typical tank strata where you have all it covered. You can do a similar thing here too. You're gonna have your Fundulus notatus, your killifish at the top. You can have your midwater swimmers like many of your shiners are, et cetera, or have some of your bottom dwellers like some of your your dace species, as well as your darters and such, and be able to have a nice active kind of stream tank and be able to keep all those levels occupied and moving. Or if you're mimicking a certain part of that creek, you can pick whichever one interests you the most and mimic that portion as well too. So generally, like we went over, it's just those species are generally kind of what you're gonna find. So what does native fish mean to you guys? Like, what do you think of when someone says, I'm gonna go catch me a native fish, right? Some of you may just think this. Some of you may have fond memories of this scaring you as a child and deeply scarring you against animatronics, right? It's not a personal story. I'm just stating facts. No. I think it's kind of underrated in the fact that when people generally think of native fish, it automatically goes to game fish. Game fish are cool. School of crappies in a 220-gallon tank is neat and all, but I tend to find some of these species, like Fundulus notatus, the black striped top minnow, to be way more interesting. Maybe even try yourself the blunt-nosed minnow, like we talked about in Ransom Lake. As a group of these, they were literally swarming, and I was able to catch with a microfishing line probably 20 different individuals just in a small 2-foot by 2-foot space. In breeding colors, they get more extreme. Really quick, jumping back to nuances, I'm going to show you guys some colored up photos of some darters and some colored down photos. We usually see darters in books and stuff, and like not southern red belly dace, but shiners, things like that, when they're fully colored up, things of that nature. Know that just like your breeding fish, or any of you that do like Central American cichlids or South American cichlids where they get really flushed with color during breeding, etc., not all native fish stay colored up year round, just like they don't stay colored up like that 24/7 unless if they're breeding, etc. Similar case to native fish. So just keep you posted. I'm going to have some examples of that. Going back to central mud minnow, here's another photo of an individual. Kind of pretty, right? I know I was knocking him earlier, but I mean, he's got some pretty fine looking scales on him.
Do you have mud minnows available? Did you bring any?
I didn't, unfortunately. I know where to get some though, but yeah, sounds good. Red shiners, have you guys ever seen these down here? I don't have them in my area. They're like in the southern half of Illinois and your guys' area. Interesting fish. These actually are available in the aquarium trade from time to time. They call them rainbow dace, which is taxonomically not a very fun hurdle to jump over right there. They're a Cyprinella species, and they're actually quite hardy in the sense and pretty aggressive in their range to the point where they're actually extirpating other species and outcompeting other species. A lot of, when I hinted earlier to degradation of streams via like phosphates from fertilizers and farms and stuff like that running the streams, they're occupying a lot of those creeks and pushing out any natives from that area because they can tolerate those harsher conditions and those higher nutrient loads and things of that nature. Beautiful fish though. I mean, my goodness, you got a bright blue fish. They've got these really cool notches behind their operculum as well too. The males will get these bright red fins and kind of a silvery blue body. Great aquarium fish. Spot fin shiner, we already went over this guy, so we'll skip past them. This was one of the target species that Ty and I, all of the group of us that we went caught. These are southern red belly dace. There is a northern red belly dace. There's also a mountain red belly dace, and I'm sure there's something else in between, UFO native red belly, I don't know, something like that. Come up with whatever name you want. But absolutely beautiful, and in this case, you've got a female on the bottom, and that's the male that we caught. So we only caught one when we were there. They lay their eggs in chub mounds and chub nests. So there are fish called chubs. They're a different group of fishes, and in the breeding season, they'll collect pebbles into these mounds, basically, that are not only for them to display breeding behaviors, but for numerous other species. How many of you have seen any of Isaac's or any of those photos of these big mounds of rocks with all these huge swarms of brightly colored fishes around them? Anyone? Okay, so some of us are familiar with some other works and such, but there's a lot of different chub species throughout the U.S. Unfortunately, in the Midwest, we have horny-head chubs. They're not the most spectacular looking fish unless if they're in breeding season and they get these really cool breeding tubercles and stuff on their face, but most of the season they're pretty bland colored and whatnot. But southern red belly dace are one of those species, I believe, that breeds on those nests and needs that species to be able to breed. They can be bred in captivity though without them as well too. Yeah. Western black-nosed dace is a very common species. Males get this nice rusty belt color on the side as well too. Green-sided darters is another great darter species that's out here and in southern Illinois as well too. Really give you that, I mean, species name is blenoides, so it gives you that, blunny kind of smaller, fish look. Fantail darters are a great species, absolutely beautiful. They stay relatively smaller than a lot of other species as well too. Orange throat darters. So here's a colored up male. This is what Steve has had, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a big poster child for native fish in my mind, an absolutely beautiful species. There's a little bit more colored down, still within the season, but still has some nice color. And then you have rainbow darter, so probably one that we're all very familiar with here, right? That's a nice male. Just some close-up shots of them. Black banded darters, Persina maculata. This is actually one of my favorite species. They get much bigger. They're a larger darter species. They occupy more of that woody habitat. So when you're seine netting or you're dip netting around fallen trees, etc., you'll find them there. They're just cool pattern, nice contrast. So we've already talked about some of the ethics, but just to go over it again, if you have the chance and you're able to buy the fish and the plants that you're looking from someone commercially where you can have a receipt and it's ethically done, always go that route if you can. Otherwise, please always research your local and state guidelines. If anyone wants to talk about ethics and things of that nature afterwards, I'd be happy to. There's a lot of different nuances to it all, a lot of different perspectives. But basically, in a nutshell, is if our local waters and streams become teeming with non-native species or species that are not native to that range, et cetera, it's not going to bode well for aquarium keepers in a nutshell, or there may be harsher backlash from fish and game, wildlife, et cetera, and for understandable reasons too. So when it comes down to it, dare to resist, right? Don't introduce pathogens, don't introduce invasive species, and don't bring negativity to the hobby in that sense. It can be done correctly, it can be done in a way that's not gonna create any drama or anything like that. So source responsibly. So here's a little list from Jonas explaining some of the species that he has available. This is not current, but it was a while back ago. Check your local aquarium clubs. Once you have that fish or you have that native species, it's in your captive care from then on out. You're not going to be giving it back to the river or anything like that. Best thing is to swap fish around, or if someone breeds one in your aquarium club, give them or bring them here to one of your local swaps. Keep that fish going, but keep it going in a hobby and keep people knowing about where it came from and understanding that it can't be released in the wild. So there you go. This little parting shot of Melanie doing her thing in the creek. And the best part is you get out in nature and you get to spend some time with some cool cats. So get out there and get in the creek. And that's all I have for you guys tonight. So appreciate it. I'm joking. There's about a million other slides of more native fish, but that's for another time. So, we'll do the quick flash through. You got some Tennessee there. You got a little bit of everything. So awesome. Thank you, guys. This guy? Cool. Perfect.
All right, this is getting close to the last chance to buy.
I was already there. You're just too tall.
I love the old ones because most of the names are now obsolete or anything like that. It's really funny to kind of look through.
I got one of those keeping monkeys.
Like monkeys, like apes? Oh, that's wild. That's like 80s fish store right there. That's like old store where you could go buy lemurs and all that stuff too.
Let's get some.
Yeah.